Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone. In a video message released earlier today, the Secretary General said that the United Nations this morning has begun an operation to defuse what might be the world's largest ticking time bomb. He said that a complex maritime salvage effort is now underway in the Red Sea off the coast of war-torn Yemen to transfer 1 million barrels of oil from the decaying FSO Safer to a replacement vessel. The oil aboard the Safer is being pumped into the replacement vessel called the Yemen, formerly the Nautica, in a ship-to-ship transfer that is expected to take 19 days to complete. In the absence of anyone else willing or able to perform this task, the Secretary General said, the United Nations stepped up and assumed the risk to conduct this very delicate operation. The ship-to-ship transfer of oil, which has started today, is the critical next step in avoiding an environmental and humanitarian catastrophe on a colossal scale, he added. And of course, you just heard from Achim Steiner, the UNDP administrator, and David Gressly, the resident and humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, about the situation on the FSO Safer. On Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator there, Denise Brown, wrapped up her visit to Odessa today after visiting the port and meeting with the mayor and governor to discuss sustained humanitarian support, particularly ahead of the winter. On the response front, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continues to support communities across the country. Today, an interagency convoy delivered essential supplies to 1,700 people in the most affected communities, which are located 7 kilometers from the border with the Russian Federation in the Sumsak Oblast. The supplies included food, medicine and hygiene items, as well as tarpaulin sheets, mattresses, blankets, and solar lamps. They were provided by the UN Refugee Agency, UNICEF, the International Organization for Migration, and the World Health Organization. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, arrived in Rome today for the UN Food System Summit +2 stock-taking moment. Upon arrival, she participated in a number of events. At the Africa event, Ms. Mohammed discussed sustainable investments to build food sovereignty in Africa and stressed the need for strengthening domestic resource mobilization, investing in climate action, and fixing the global financial architecture. The Deputy Secretary General then delivered remarks at the Healthy and Protected Oceans event and underscored the urgency of protecting oceans and coastal ecosystems, safeguarding the future of food systems in small island developing states, and forging a path towards a more sustainable and equitable world that benefits all people. Later today, Ms. Mohammed will take part in a farmers' market event together with Antonio Tajani, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy. On the margins of the conference, Ms. Mohammed held several bilateral meetings with heads of delegations, as well as the President of the Islamic Development Bank. On Syria, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that our partners in healthcare confirmed today that the cross-border referral of new cancer patients from northwest Syria to Turkey via Bab al-Hawa will resume tomorrow. This came following advocacy by us and our partners with the support of the government of Turkey, as well as efforts led by Syrian communities. Radiography equipment will be installed in 2 hospitals in northern Aleppo, and our partners are working to ensure that there is long-term capacity to operate these machines. Prior to this, there was no radiotherapy equipment in northwest Syria. The cross-border referral system through Bab al-Hawa resumed on the 5th of June, following a temporary disruption by the February earthquakes. Since then, more than 860 cancer patients have crossed from Turkey to northwest Syria, including those who received treatment prior to the earthquakes, as well as new patients. However, the backlog of new patients has grown to 608 new cancer patients, 60% of whom are women and children. Our health partners reported that there are at least 4,300 active cancer cases in northwest Syria. This morning, the new UN Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel, Leonardo Santos Simão, briefed the Security Council for the first time since taking office. He welcomed the holding of elections in several countries in the region, but he added the continued underrepresentation of women across the region in political processes and decision-making not only deprives half of the population of essential rights, but is also a massive impediment to development. Turning to the situation in the Sahel, he said that the security there continued to deteriorate, with multiple attacks against civilians and defense and security forces, especially in the Liptako-Gourma area. With the termination of MINUSMA's mandate, he said, the situation in Mali continues to require our utmost attention. Mr. Simão said that he would travel to Mali shortly. His office will also continue its liaison effort with the Economic Commission of West African States and other partners. Meanwhile, he added, as coastal countries have enhanced their efforts to strengthen internal security capabilities and to reinforce bilateral cooperation, the southward expansion of insecurity remains a potent threat. His full remarks have been shared with you. Our colleagues from the peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic, MINUSCA, have provided support to the Central African and Ugandan governments as they carry out the voluntary repatriation of 61 Lord's Resistance Army ex-combatants and their families to Entebbe, Uganda. The ex-combatants have been living in the Central African Republic for around 15 years. The operation, which took place on the 21st of July, is the result of an agreement between the Central African Republic and Uganda for the voluntary repatriation of ex-combatants and their dependents living in Zemio and Mboki in the country's southeast. The candidates for voluntary repatriation returned to Entebbe on board a special flight from Bangassou. The UN mission secured the operation and provided logistical support, including the deployment of the joint delegation in the region, the storage of weapons recovered from LRA elements, the transfer by air from Zemio to Bangassou of all candidates for voluntary repatriation, as well as their security and accommodation in Bangassou. The head of MINUSCA, Valentin Rugwabiza, said that the mission will continue to support the authorities' efforts to disarm, demobilize, reintegrate, or repatriate all members of armed groups present in the country. From Sudan, the humanitarian coordinator there, Clementine Nkwete Salami, is appealing for an end to attacks on civilians and humanitarian workers in the country. She warned that surging violations by the parties to the conflict are deepening the suffering of civilians, thousands of whom have already been killed and injured after 100 days of conflict. Ms. Nkwete Salami said that at least 18 aid workers in Sudan have also been killed, and many more have been injured. More than 24 humanitarian personnel have been detained, and some remain unaccounted for. At least 50 humanitarian warehouses have been looted, more than 80 offices ransacked, and more than 200 vehicles stolen. The humanitarian coordinator strongly condemned these attacks, which strike at the heart of our ongoing efforts to deliver essential aid to those in need. She reminded all of the parties to the conflict in Sudan of their obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is warning of increasing reports of attacks on healthcare in Sudan. WHO says that the relentless fighting there has left more than 80% of the country's hospitals out of service. Our peacekeeping colleagues in the Democratic Republic of the Congo tell us that over the past few days, quick responses by UN peacekeepers have helped to avert 2 attacks by the Kodeka militia in the province of Ituri. Responding to an alert about an ongoing attack in Schubert village, 36 kilometers from Jugu, peacekeepers arrived at the scene and fired warning shots. As a result, the Codeco members fled the area. The mission also provided medical assistance to an injured civilian and continued night patrols to ensure that the group did not return. Peacekeepers also intervened during an attempted Codeco attack on farmers in the village of Su, about 20 kilometers from Jugu, and subsequently escorted the civilians from the area. In Tunisia, our team there is intensifying support for migration needs. The UN Refugee Agency scaled up its assistance to support nearly 1,500 refugees and asylum seekers in need. For its part, the International Organization for Migration is providing shelter for around 250 people from sub-Saharan Africa rescued from the Tunisia-Libyan border, bringing food and water assistance to 2,000 people through the Tunisian Red Crescent. Meanwhile, UNICEF and the UN Development Program are delivering emergency supplies to 1,500 migrants, including water and sanitation kits. Our team has also just conducted an assessment mission to Sfax and South, working with national partners. We are concerned about hundreds of people who are reportedly stranded at the borders and are working with partners to bring them assistance. And that's it for me. Are there any questions? Yes, James.
So China has a new old foreign minister today, Wang Yi, getting the job again, but it still raises the question of what has happened to the former foreign minister. Clearly, the Secretary General has to have good interactions with all countries, particularly the P5. Is he concerned that former Foreign Minister Xin Gang has completely disappeared?
I'm not aware of any information about Xin Gang. We were in touch with the former foreign minister at many levels in recent months, and of course we are also acquainted with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who had previously held that position.
So who's you're talking about Xin Gang as the former foreign minister?
Yes,
but he has not been seen or heard of by anyone for literally weeks now. It's not clear whether he is unwell, whether he is detained, even if he's still alive. Would the Secretary General ask the People's Republic to clarify his status?
Well, I believe those are issues to ask the government of the People's Republic. From our standpoint, we did interact with him and are well aware of Mr. Xin Gang and are also acquainted with Mr. Wang Yi.
Well, I mean, I just go back to 2021. There was a missing tennis player, Peng Shui. At the time, the Human Rights Office said it's important to have proof of her whereabouts. We would stress it's important to know where she is, her state, and her well-being. Why is a missing tennis player different from one of the most important positions in this country? We don't know whether he's alive or not.
Well, I think he's a government official, and it's up to the government to discuss where he is and his whereabouts.
And the UN is not concerned about senior government officials suddenly being disappeared.
We don't make an assumption one way or the other. Certainly, we wish him well. We hope he's well. But in terms of questions about officials of the government of China, I believe you need to ask those
but isn't this
to the
potentially
government.
a human rights issue, potentially?
I think that's based on an assumption.
It's based on no information at all, Farhan.
Well,
because, I mean, if you go to the Foreign Ministry website, it's been scrubbed of his name completely now.
James, if there's no information at all, we have no information at all. I mean, that's simply what it is. It's up to the government of the People's Republic to provide the needed information. Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. The British ambassador said today that the UK is working with the United Nations and Turkey to revive the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Can you tell us specifically what the United Nations is doing? Have there been senior level talks? We know that the Secretary General, of course, is in Europe in a similar time zone.
We continue to pursue, as we have said, the efforts to make sure that exports of food and fertilizer from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation can proceed. I don't have details on this to give you at this point, but as the Secretary General has made clear, he has not given up on this because it's essential not just for those two countries, but for the well-being of the world.
Can you find out some details for us, because this was a specific statement?
Yeah, as soon as there are details we can disclose from our side, we will do so. At this stage, given the situation we're in right now, we're not in that position. But we can confirm that we're continuing with our efforts. Deshi?
Still on Black Sea Initiative. Is the United Nations still in contact with Russian Federation officials on this deal or not?
As you know, the Secretary General provided in a letter information about proposals.
So that's the last contact?
For the Black Sea Initiative. You've heard what he had to say last week about the decisions taken, and of course we are continually reaching out, and we are willing to keep up contacts that would take up the concerns expressed by the Russian Federation, as well as other aspects of the initiative.
Farhan, you didn't answer my question. Are there any communications between the United Nations and Russian Federation after the termination of the Black Sea Initiative on this issue?
We're continuing our contacts at various levels.
So, just a quick follow-up on Edith's question, another question. Let me ask it in the other way. Does the UN support a Black Sea grain corridor that the protection of those ships provided by member states from, obviously, Russian Federation, if there's the risk, would the UN support that deal?
At this stage, I don't want to comment on specific details of different deals. We are looking into and working to see what can be done to support various initiatives to make sure that grain and other exports can continue to proceed. Yes, Vladimir.
Hi, Farhan. On the grain deal too. Today, Russian President's aide, Mr. Yuri Ushakov, said that grain deal is just suspended. So what's it from the UN position? Is it suspended or terminated?
We are not the ones who have tried to end any participation in the deal. That is language that we received from the Russian Federation. The language we received from the Russian Federation did include the word terminated. It's up to them to clarify further if there's any change in that. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Farhan. I have one question with two parts. First, tomorrow the Israeli right and the settlers are planning a flag march in old Jerusalem. If you have any comment on that. And the second, today Israel killed 3 Palestinians in the city of Nablus. Do you have any comment on both incidents?
Well, our concerns about operations that have any civilian casualties apply in the second case. In the first case, you know what we've said about the status of Jerusalem. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone respects the need to preserve the status quo in Jerusalem. Yes, Deji.
Sorry.
And then Murad.
Another question on Syria. The U.S. government said that a Russian fighter jet struck an American drone with a flare over Syria in the past weekend, and accusing Moscow of unprofessional behavior in the sky above Syria. Any comments from the UN on that incident?
Well, we want all of the militarization of the area in and around Syria to cease. Part of that, as you know from what Geir Peterson said yesterday, is that we want to have a lasting peace in Syria, and I would just refer you back to what he said about his continuing efforts on that.
Do you think there's a solving issue on this? Because you heard the Russian fighter jet struck a U.S. drone in Syria.
We're well aware of the many nations that have been present over these last years. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Murad.
Thank you, Farhan. An Egyptian court relisted today dozens of Egyptians, including Al Jazeera journalists, in a new list of terrorism for a period of 5 years. That means like legal consequences. And you know, Al Jazeera journalists have been being held in for years now without being charged.
Yes, and we've expressed our concerns about the situation of journalists, including of Al Jazeera journalists in Egypt, and we reiterate those concerns. Yes, James, and then in the back, whoever you are.
Yeah, I've got a few more Ukraine ones, if you don't mind. You already asked about the comments from the British Ambassador, Barbara Woodward, but she also said 2 new bits of information. One, that the UK believes that Russia has laid additional mines in the Black Sea, and also that Russia was using, on its recent attacks on food in Odessa, was using ordnance that is designed to take out aircraft carriers. Is this sort of information been shared with the UN? You still have a joint coordination committee staff, even if they're not working with the Russians. Are you aware of these sea mines from Turkey or Ukraine in Istanbul?
Yes, you're right that the staff of the Joint Coordination Center is still there. The UN staff continues their involvement and will keep apprised of any developments. Obviously, we would be concerned about any such mining or other activity.
But you haven't been informed of it through your staff, through Turkey and Ukraine or any other member state, about new sea mines?
I'm not aware of any first-hand information of that.
Okay.
No.
Another bit of new information, or reasonably new information, regarding Odessa. One of the things that was hit was a Romanian flagged ship, a civilian vessel. Does that concern the Secretary General, that a third-party country vessel has been hit, that was only a civilian vessel, that was not there for any military purposes, and of course adding to that, Romania being a member of NATO?
We would be concerned about anything that affects civilian facilities, such as civilian vessels, and of course anything that carries with it the risk of any further expansion of the conflict.
I have one more on Ukraine, then I have one on something else, but maybe you want to go to someone else.
Let's ask the question on Ukraine and then let's get to the other people.
Okay, so it's comments today by the High Commissioner of Human Rights, Volker Turk, about the Olenevka prison explosion. He seems to be adding new information that the UN has not put out before. He's saying that it definitely wasn't caused by a HIMARS rocket, which was the allegation that was coming from the Russian Federation. And also, when you cancelled your fact-finding mission, you said it was just because of lack of access. He makes it very clear that the lack of access has come from Russia. Russia has not granted requests to access parts of Ukraine or given satisfactory safety assurances for a site visit. So what is the Secretary General, the High Commissioner makes it very, very clear that the truth needs to be known, the accountability is needed for the families. What is the Secretary General doing about this, and what is he saying to the Russian Federation, given this new information that the High Commissioner is now putting out there?
Well, certainly he supports the work of the High Commissioner on this. The High Commissioner's work is being done in coordination. He does, of course, share information with the Secretariat here, and so we're aware of his findings.
And you're putting those findings to the Russian Federation?
Yes, of course, we'll deal with all of our various interlocutors, including the Russian ones. Yes, in the back.
Thank you, Farhan. I'm Sinan with the Rudal Media Network. My question is about the Turkish drones have been targeting Kurdish forces and civilians in northeast Syria. And any comments about that?
I have no new comment on this. I mean, you'll have seen our reports about the situation in Syria and the concerns we've expressed, and so I would just echo those. Deji?
Just a quick time question. Will Ms. Dennis Brown have breakfast in the new time or not?
We've requested again to see whether she can do a briefing to you later. She'll be briefing the Security Council, but we'll have to see whether she can talk to you after that.
Okay.
Yes. They're both via. Oh, I think there's David Gressly. All right, Mr. Gressly, are you on?
And I'm here too, Farhan. Good afternoon, or good morning to you.
Good morning. Good afternoon to you, I guess. I can see you. I knew that you were connected okay. We're just trying to wait. All right, we have both you and David Gressly. Can we get them on the screen? Yeah. Yeah. I can see them, but you can't. Good for me, not as good for you. Hold on, we're going to get them on the screen in just 1 second. All right, great. Thank you. We're very pleased to have with us this morning to give us a little bit of good news for a change, the administrator of the UN Development Program, Achim Steiner, and the resident and humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, David Gressly. They're both speaking to you by VTC about the developments concerning the FSO Safer off the coast of Yemen. We'll first hear from Mr. Steiner. Mr. Steiner, over to you.
Thank you, Farhan. It's a day in which both David and I think, are both extremely relieved that we can finally join the Secretary General, as he has done this morning, and speak to the world about a major milestone. Years and months of preparation for the salvage operation of the FSO Safer lie behind us, many challenges, many hurdles, but as of this morning, we are very pleased to report that the pumps are on. The pipes have been laid between the FSO Safer and the Yemen, the replacement tanker, and the first gallons of oil have in fact been pumped off the Safer onto the Yemen. As many of you have realized over the last few months, this has been a highly complex operation in which the United Nations, represented by David Gressly as the resident humanitarian coordinator, has been leading the negotiations, first of all, amongst the parties in Yemen in order to bring about an agreement and a framework within which such a unique and unusual salvage operation could take place. As we know, sadly, Yemen is still a country that finds itself in the midst of a conflict more than 8 years already lying behind it, with many consequences for its people. But one threat that has been looming large over the people of Yemen, but also the Red Sea and all the countries in the region, is this 47-year-old rusting tanker. 1.13 million barrels of oil loaded onto it, and by the way, some a few weeks ago questioned whether there was actually in fact any oil on the vessel, and I can assure you we have now with independent surveyors measured the amount of oil on the vessel. It is around 1.13 million barrels. And as we speak, the operation is now underway, involving a highly diverse set of skills and expertise. Smith, the salvage company that we retained, is now conducting the actual pumping operation, and David will speak to that in a moment since he is on the vessel right now. But we've also had support, first of all, from many experts across the world who have contributed to the planning of this operation. As many of you will have followed over the last few months, it has involved anything from obviously maritime oil spill experts, maritime lawyers, insurance brokers, ship brokers, right down to the technical experts who are now on board of the FSO Safer and the Yemen. For example, also a chemist, because we are monitoring constantly the level of inert gases in the tanks that have been pumped in order to reduce the risk of explosion. There have been underwater surveys of the structural integrity of the FSO Safer. And so the details obviously can be looked up by many of you. As we speak to you today, we are very relieved at this moment that the operation of pumping the oil has finally begun. But let us also be clear, this is just another step in this highly complex operation that ultimately will lead to the emptying of the tanks, then the cleaning of the tanks, then the towing away and the sound and ecological and socially responsible scrapping of the FSO Safer, and the delivery of a calm buoy. All of these are part of this operation FSO Safer. Farhan, I think with that, if you allow me, I'll happily hand over to David.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Gressly, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Achim, for that background. As Achim has mentioned, I'm currently on board the Endeavor, which is on the bridge, in fact, which is overseeing the work for Smith. Right behind me, you can see the FSO Safer itself, and just beyond that is the Yemen, the formerly known as the Nautica, the vessel that is currently receiving oil to offload from the FSO Safer. I have to say, since arriving here on the 30th of May, the Endeavor, the Smith Salvage has done everything possible to stabilize the FSO Safer, the vessel right behind me, to make sure that the transfer will be as safe from an environmental point of view as well as from a personnel point of view. We're working very closely with local authorities as well, who are providing support on the FSO Safer to the operation. There's a good coordination going on between those on the FSO Safer and the other vessels in the operation. So we're very pleased how that has progressed. As you know, there's over 1 million barrels of oil on board, so this is going to take some time to finish. We will know shortly how much we have actually moved today. They're actually taking the sounding readings as we speak to see what quantity was moved, but we do expect that this will take approximately 19 days to move the 1.1 million barrels off of the vessel. We started work. The actual pumping started at 10:45 this morning, just to give you a precise time, on one compartment, and then a second compartment was brought online a couple hours later. And this will now work 24/7 going forward to empty the vessel as quickly as is possible. However, an operation of this nature always has ongoing risk. I think a great deal of work, as Achim has described, with various experts and with the support of local authorities, have gone a long ways to ensure mitigating those risks. But we continue to monitor for potential problems as we go along, and I think we have a very good team spirit here to deal with that if there's any issues that come up. There'll be a very rapid response to that. We have put in place, as a part of that, a robust crisis management team based in Hodeidah, and assembled expertise and equipment required to respond to any incident that may happen. You may recall that the Sana authorities requested that the plan that we're implementing now, they asked that this be done under a UN umbrella. So we did that through the Memorandum of Understanding reached in March 5th of last year, and have been working towards this day ever since. We're working particularly closely with the SAFER Technical Committee based in Sana'a, and they have been providing access, security, and technical support, and have been working to establish a solid cooperation and coordination system for this operation. I also have to acknowledge the very important support we've received from the government of Yemen, who, among other things, has made a $5 million contribution through the Global Environmental Facility, and have provided good political and technical support throughout the preparation of this operation. We have so far raised over approximately $121 million from 23 member states, but also the European Union and private sector and the general public. In addition, we've gotten some bridging funding from OCHA to actually make sure we could go ahead with this operation, and are working to find reimbursement for them as well. We have to acknowledge their role in this. The broad coalition working to prevent the catastrophe includes countless individuals and organizations that provided invaluable expertise and in-kind support. It includes environmental groups like Greenpeace, and in Yemen, Home Akhtar, and includes private companies like the Faham Group that proposed the initiative that was the basis for the plan that we're implementing today. I think this also shows the breadth of not only of the operation, but of the concern and the threat that this vessel presented. Of course, the entire UN system is engaged, and I'm sure you've seen the statement from the Secretary General, who has placed great importance on resolving this issue. As the Secretary General said, the United Nations has stepped up and assumed this risk to conduct a very delicate operation when no one else was in a position to do so. With the UN in the lead, the world has pulled together to avoid a nightmare scenario that has been talked about for the last 8 years. The completion of the oil transfer will mean the worst-case humanitarian, environmental, and economic catastrophe will have been avoided. But it's not the end of the operation. The next critical steps include the delivery and installment of a catenary anchor leg mooring, which is a buoy that's attached to the pipeline, to which the replacement vessel will be safely tethered. This should be in place by September, and we need to get that done in that time frame because the weather becomes more problematic after that period. I'm very, very thankful for all the support this project has received, And a final note, I really want to congratulate the United Nations Development Program under the leadership of Achim for the outstanding work that they've done in confronting all of the technical challenges, the financial risks, and sheer work that was required to get us to this point. So I want to thank not only him, but all of his team for all of the support that we've received over the last months. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I'll now turn over the floor for questions. Amelie.
Thanks a lot for the briefing. Amélie Botelier from AFP News Agency. I have two questions. First, on the financing, can you just tell us how much money you still need to complete the financing of the whole operation? And on the oil itself, if I remember correctly, last time you talked to us, you said that the oil would be tested to to estimate if there have been the quality of it, if there have been some damage over the time, to assess how much it would be worth. And so if so, can you tell us what the quality and then what the shipment of the oil is worth and what will happen with it now, since you said you work closely with the Yemen authority? Is the oil going back to them, or is there some kind of sharing with the Houthis? Thank you very much.
Maybe Farhan, I can begin by, because the issue of finance obviously is weighing heavily on our minds, as many of you know, and you just pointed out again. We have benefited from the generosity of many countries. David already alluded to 23 member states of the United Nations, to whom we're extremely grateful, private companies that have come forward, foundations. But as of today, we are still short of around $20 to $21 million. It's a little bit a matter also that is connected to the recycling and the sale of the FSO Safer eventually. But it is a fairly desperate situation, because we have had to borrow from our humanitarian colleagues in OCHA or arrange this bridging finance in order to keep the operation going. Otherwise, we would have had to suspend it, because UNDP has signed contracts to which we are obliged to make payments on certain deadlines. And we obviously are appealing again today, together, as the Secretary General did in his message this morning, that some others may step forward who so far perhaps have sat back and watched this operation, perhaps because they didn't believe it was feasible or that it could not be done. I think as of this morning, we have, as the United Nations, I think, shown the world that not only did we take this threat extremely seriously, we have also put in place all the arrangements, and the operation is now underway. And this is a moment where, again, I would appeal to anyone who is in a position, and I speak here also to the CEOs in the oil and gas industry, in the shipping industry. This is an incident that is no one's individual responsibility, but is now our collective duty and responsibility to solve. And in that spirit, I think the United Nations can only act when it has the support of the world to assist on this. And some have asked whether the sale of the oil, the eventual sale of the oil, could not cover these costs. And as David might explain in a moment, at this stage, an agreement could not be found on the actual sale of the oil. But the priority with everyone was to get this cargo off a 47-year-old rusting tanker that could break apart or could explode at any point. When that operation is concluded, there have been discussions with both sides, and the eventual sale of the oil is indeed on the horizon. But as you can imagine, in the very complex setting of Yemen right now, lack of trust and also, in a sense, doubts about how this would work, this will be a next step in which ultimately the sale of oil will take place. And just to clarify, we had some delays in order to be able to send samples of the oil to laboratories. That set of samples has now been sent, and we will expect a qualitative assessment also within the next few days. But in the meantime, we were able to conduct the actual measurement with an independent surveyor on the vessel. So this is currently the stage at which we are. But David, over to you.
Yeah, I think in many ways, I'll just simply echo what you just said. The samples have been taken. They were required in part for insurance purposes as well, to determine the quality of the oil in terms of valuing it for the insurance. But the oil is in pretty good shape. We'll get the real details when that's done. And the full amount of the oil that we had expected is here. The compartments storing the oil, in many cases, were still fully intact, with not a large amount of oxygen on the inside, actually surprisingly. So a few were not, but even there, the quality of the oil seems to be still pretty good. So from that point of view, this still has value. Secondly, as Achim mentioned, the primary purpose of what we're trying to do now is secure the oil so it doesn't spill into the Red Sea. A real threat. I mean, after having seen the FSO Safer itself close up, it's quite clear that it had may not have had every problem imagined, but it had many problems. So the one good thing about the Safer is that the hull itself is very much intact, which is helping facilitate a more rapid transfer of the oil. But all the other systems were broken down, and it was very much a question of just a little bit more time before this oil will have spilled into the Red Sea. So we have now bought a great deal of time to work out legal issues, the issues among the parties themselves on how to sell and what for. So we have time now to discuss that without an imminent threat of catastrophe. So we'll continue to work on that and encourage the parties to find a solution to eventually removing the oil, ideally for the benefit of the people of Yemen. That's what we all want to see, so that this threat not only is put aside, but the value here is put to good use for the people of Yemen. Thank you.
Thanks. Deshi?
Actually, Emily just asked one of my question, and just want to know, is there any plan for UNDP and for the United Nations after the whole issue got settled? How are you going to deal with the Yemen? I mean the tanker, the new tanker, and can you tell us, since the starting of the transfer of the oil, how do you evaluate the situation on the Safer tanker, which you actually just answered a part of it, I believe. Thank you.
Well, if I may begin, I think the situation on the tanker is, as David described, one where the last few weeks were spent on trying to mitigate all the risks of what is a highly complex operation. Not only is it, at the best of times to have a ship-to-ship transfer not as straightforward as some imagine, to do so in a conflict zone, to do so on a tanker that for many years had not been inspected, all of these preparatory steps, in a sense, had to be put in place. And let me also tell you, one of the elements of this operation was also to work together with the authorities locally in Hodeidah to train local technicians in case of an oil spill, because also as a result of the mining on land of landmines, it is not clear how easily one could, in a sense, mount an operation from the beaches should there be an oil leak in the course of this operation, which is also one reason why, in the end, together with the insurance companies, we agreed that we would arrange for an aerial standby capacity that should, in the unlikely case, a spill or a leak occur, we have a three-tiered plan, and if it is a major one, we could also use aerial support capacity in order to use chemicals to contain the potential fallout from such an oil leak. All these are elements in the preparatory process, and I should mention here also, for instance, the insurance companies. As you can imagine, not many insurance companies are necessarily keen to become engaged here. Together with our insurance broker in London, Howden, months and months of work went into finding a series of insurance companies or underwriters who would be willing to actually sign up to these 9 insurance policies that we put in place. And so in that sense, the operation is now mitigating virtually all the major risks, and yet we all know that there is no 100% certainty, which is why these precautionary measures and contingency plans are also in place. And just to emphasize, we have an agreement within this operation that UNDP will continue to oversee the Yemen, as it is now called, with a Euronav crew until the end of this year. And when David said we, in a sense, bought ourselves some time, this is also a time window in which we are training SEPOC staff on the maintenance of the vessel, and at the same time, hopefully with a view to advancing the negotiations between both parties on maybe an agreement of how the sale of the oil could take place.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Just on the situation, just to complement what I said earlier and Achim has just mentioned, I had a chance to meet with the crew of the Smith that was rotating out of Djibouti when I flew into Djibouti to come in with the Nautica. And I asked them the very question. I said, after several weeks on board the Sapphire, what did you find? And they made it very clear to me that this vessel desperately needed to be offloaded of its oil. It was not something that could be repaired. It was not something that would last that long. It was in better shape after their stabilization efforts, which would have extended its life without a spill. But that's with their efforts that they did during the initial phase. So this was a very serious issue. As we've said in the past, it was never a question of if, it was only a question of when. Unfortunately, we got here at a good time, while the vessel is still intact enough to make a relatively a more environmental risk transfer possible. So we're very thankful that we found that condition. As we are speaking, in fact, UNDP and people on my team as well are sitting down with authorities here to talk about the very future of this, particularly after the 6 months that Achim has just mentioned, including crewing, how they will be trained, but also maintenance and things of that issue. So we have a bit of time. We don't have a long time. In fact, that's why we're starting now. We're not waiting for another 3 or 4 months. We want to get this taken. We want to have a clear plan that people can buy into before the end of the year, obviously. So we're taking that part very seriously as well. Thank you.
Thanks. James?
James Bays from Al Jazeera. Gentlemen, I wanted to just sort of look slightly beyond the tanker. I mean, this has been a very long-running saga. It is a very specific and serious case, and I know you can't celebrate until all the oil is finally pumped off. But as a symbol for Yemen, the fact you got everyone to agree to this, what does it mean for the humanitarian situation in Yemen? What does it potentially mean for the political situation in Yemen going forwards?
Well, perhaps just a couple of comments and then David from the operational perspective on the ground. I mean, as you know, the UN family is heavily engaged in Yemen. First of all, it is one of the largest humanitarian disasters that have grown out of this conflict. And as we speak, one of the implications also of averting an oil spill is that the shipping routes, for example, into Hodeidah, which are a vital lifeline to bring in humanitarian supplies, would not be interrupted. Just to give you one more illustration of how interconnected this ship is with the fate of millions of people on land, never mind the hundreds of thousands who would lose their income through a destroyed fisheries, and many neighboring countries also having catastrophic impacts on their economies. But for all of us who work in Yemen today, and UNDP is one of a number of UN agencies that works in many parts of Yemen today, we are desperately trying to help people survive in the midst of this terrible conflict. And obviously, when you speak to the larger geopolitical context, there have been signals over the last few months that are positive in the sense that parties have started to engage with one another again, whether directly or through neighboring countries. And one wants to be hopeful that a successful conclusion of this operation would also at least add confidence on both sides that something in terms of next steps is not only desirable, needed, but also possible. But David, in terms of the practicalities, particularly in the humanitarian operation, I mean, over to you in Hodeidah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think first thing I would like to cite is the extreme popularity, favorable of response we're seeing from the Yemen public on this for them is a very important milestone. They know the threat, and so the public is quite supportive of this initiative. And your question goes well beyond the super tanker itself and its immediate, the consequences of not acting. I'm not ready to say that this is going to help peace come to Yemen, but it is an example that peace, could be a stepping stone for greater dialogue between the parties that are in conflict as we speak. It shows that there can be an accommodation on very important issues, and I hope, and it's a hope, that it can lead to greater support for a peace process here in Yemen that the people of Yemen, after 8 years, really need. I witness, I've been almost everywhere in Yemen, and I can tell you the consequences of this war have been quite serious, and it will be time to bring it to an end. If this can contribute, that will be a wonderful thing as well, and we certainly hope so. But that remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thanks. Murad?
Thank you. Could you give us some more details on how this operation being secured and how the Houthi contribute on that? And I think Mr. Gressly mentioned the risk surrounding this operation. Could you elaborate more, and does that include like security threats?
David, do you want to go ahead?
Well, frankly speaking, we haven't seen direct security threats against the operation itself. The authorities in Sana'a have control of the Hodeidah port area and the surrounding territory. So, and also we've worked with the coalition to deconflict the whole operation, and they've agreed they want to see this go successfully. So I think the primary security threats have been fully mitigated in this case. The primary issue, of course, is that this is a country still at war, civil war, but also within the region, and that causes a great deal of distrust and a lot of more scrutiny from a security point of view. So we have to be very careful in our work to be seen as totally neutral, impartial in our work, and in a position to make sure that what we're doing is totally above board. Transparency is required. So it's really a question of building trust that we're here to do just what we're doing, trying to end the threat of this tanker. It's a very highly suspicious environment all over the country, and as you would expect in a war situation. So that's been probably one of the major challenges that we face. But direct threats, we really don't see that at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, I'd like to thank once again our guests, Achim Steiner, the Administrator of the UN Development Program, and David Gressly, the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen. Mr. Gressly, you win for having the best backdrop of all of our recent guests. Have a great day.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.